Celtic in Person, Episode 3, James Kelly, Part 3, 1894 to 97. A small correction to start off with. I said in Episode 1 that the club's new strip, first worn in December 1889, consisted of green and white striped shirt and white shorts. In fact, apart from a brief period in 1891-92, Celtic wore black shorts until 1898. Despite having just secured a second successive league championship in the spring of 1894, Celtic was not an altogether happy club as the new season kicked off in August. On the field, they had lost two successive Scottish Cup finals to Queen's Park and Rangers, and had also seen Rangers take possession of the Glasgow Cup 2 seasons in a row. Strange as it may sound to modern ears, the Cup competitions were the more prestigious at this time, and despite Celtic having finished well ahead of Rangers in the league, the Ibrox club were attracting a growing support, having defeated Celtic 3 times in 4 matches in 1893-94, as well as winning the Scottish and Glasgow Cup doubles. Behind the scenes at Celtic, trouble continued to brew between the committee, most of whom were determined that the club should become a limited liability company, and the rank and file, who wanted it to remain in the hands of its members and lamented the dwindling contributions the club was making to the charitable organisations it had been created to support. By the time James Kelly retired from playing at the end of season 1896-97, the committee would have their way, and Kelly would become a member of the new Celtic Football and Athletic Company's first board of directors. With the great left-wing partnership of Sandy McMahon and Johnny Campbell suffering from recurring injuries and a subsequent dip in form, Celtic struggled in the early weeks of season 1894-95, drawing with Dundee and losing to Third Lanark to drop 3 points from their first 3 matches. Things improved considerably through September and October, including a 5-3 win over Rangers and a 6-0 win over Dumbarton, both at home, before hosting Hearts at Celtic Park on the 3rd of November, in what was to prove a very significant 2-0 defeat. Hearts were the runaway league leaders, having won all 9 of their matches played so far, and their 10th successive win was celebrated wildly both at Celtic Park, where their support was bolstered by supporters of other Glasgow clubs, and in Edinburgh, where they received a hero's welcome on their return. The Edinburgh Evening News report of the 5th of November sheds light on the sudden emergence of Hearts as a force in the Scottish game, the increasingly evident decline in Celtic's playing strength, and the increasing use of modern communications technology in reporting on football, not to mention a very politically incorrect characterisation of the prodigious work rate of the Hearts defence, which I will indeed not mention here. Suffice to say, they worked very, very hard. The paper wrote of Celtic, "On Saturday again, young blood was sadly wanting in the Celtic team. While the Hibernians have been picking up good players when they needed them, the Celtic have not hit upon more than 2 or 3 class colts for a season and a half back. And if Saturday's form goes for anything, substitutes are needed for Dunbar, Kelly, Campbell and Madden. Kelly, for instance, kept Michael as well in hand as any opponent usually does till he fagged, and then the young fresh player made victory assured for his side." It may have been a typo. Kelly might have flagged rather than fagged, but given some of the words used elsewhere in the report, fagged it might well have been. The point the newspaper was making is clear though. Kelly had been expressing a wish to retire since the end of season 1892-93, and while he was still only 29 years old and would play on for another 2 seasons after this, he was no longer regarded as the force he had once been. It's not unusual to see players stay at the top well into their 30s in the modern game, but there was a time not so long ago when a 30-year-old was regarded as playing on borrowed time. Possibly in the late 19th century, with most working class people growing up with a far lower standard of living than today, the peak of a player's career might have passed even earlier. The increasing popularity of Rangers had already been attributed to their defeating Celtic in Glasgow and Scottish Cup finals in successive seasons, as fans not well disposed to the Irishmen looked around for a champion. It would seem from the Edinburgh Evening News report that there were plenty of Glaswegians cheering Hearts on against Celtic. The most surprising thing about Saturday's match to us was not the result, but the treatment meted out to the Hearts. Hitherto, the Edinburgh club has not been regarded with great favour in the West, nor have the Hearts been a great draw. But on Saturday, they were actually the popular team, and their presence accounted for the record gate taken at a league match. The attendance would exceed 20,000 all told, and the total drawings would be about £500. A portion of this represents stand drawings, but probably the Hearts would bring about £150 home with them. Of the great gathering, a large majority would no doubt be wishful of Celtic success. But when the preponderance of Celtic partisans is taken into account, the Hearts could be said to be the popular team, the Third Lanark and the Clyde supporters contributing largely to this state of affairs, and the manner in which they were received, and in the manner in which their victory was alluded to in the evening in Glasgow, should go a long way to removing the bad impressions of the Glasgow football crowd. Hearts were already being acclaimed as league champions, having now won all the first 10 of 18 matches, and they were hailed by cheering crowds all the way from Celtic Park to their Glasgow hotel. As they departed from Central Station on the Sunday morning, the concourse was crammed with enthusiastic well-wishers, and all were carried shoulder high from the platform on their return to Edinburgh. After 5 years of sustained Celtic success, Scotland was clearly hungry for a native side to put them in their place. We're used today to watching almost every match as it happens, either on satellite television or through internet streams, Fire Sticks, etc. But this was not a luxury afforded to the 19th century football fan. It would be a mistake to think, though, that it took them long to find out the results of matches, as Hearts' triumphal procession along London Road shows. The Edinburgh Evening News of the 5th of November illustrates the growing role of communications technology and the new Celtic Park's state-of-the-art facilities for the sporting press. The work of reporting the match at Celtic Park was made as pleasant as football reporting can be. So efficient a service is maintained at the Celtic Park that on Saturday the lengthy messages telegraphed to the news came through with as great dispatch and accuracy as if the match had been played in George Square in front of the General Post Office. Indebtedness must also be expressed to the National Telephone Company, the courtesy of whose Glasgow staff has frequently been acknowledged in these columns. Between telephone and telegraph, an admirable service was given, and such is the expedition with which important matters are attended to nowadays, that not only did a special edition of the news reassure crowds of anxious enthusiasts in Princes Street and neighbouring streets within a few minutes of the finish, but simultaneously with publication, the Hearts' friend, the enemy, at Logie Green were advised of the result over the news private telephone. The enthusiasm with which the news of victory was received at Logie Green and in the streets was an index of what was to follow. The Logie Green enemy referred to was St Bernard's, the club who played in the Powder Hall district of Edinburgh from 1889 to 99. They would win the Scottish Cup later that season, beating Renton 2-1 in the final. Celtic were going through a difficult period on the pitch and their form was suffering, but pride was restored before the month was out with a 2-0 victory over Rangers in the Glasgow Cup final on the 17th of November and a 4-1 defeat of Queen's Park in the Scottish Cup the following week. If there was any feeling that Rangers were becoming a bogey team, that had now been dispelled with both League and Cup victories this season. The Glasgow Cup final was an especially satisfying win. Jimmy Blessington was missing due to a family bereavement, and Johnny Campbell returned, playing on the right wing, while Sandy McMahon was moved to inside left. Celtic played with the wind in the first half, but surprisingly, Rangers pressed hard for the first 20 minutes or so, with some commentators saying they wore themselves out in that period. Dan Doyle scored the first goal for Celtic, his free kick sailing into the goal as the Rangers keeper was surrounded by challenging players. The Rangers players protested vehemently on the grounds that no one else had touched the ball before it went in, but it stood, and the Athletic News correspondent wrote on the 19th of November, "The referee would not listen to it, and the Celtic got the goal, which, so far as I could make out, was secured in a perfectly legitimate way." The second was scored by John Divers, the first of 3 Celtic players of that name, before half-time. In the second half, Celtic found themselves up against it, with Rangers enjoying the wind at their backs, and they suffered injuries to Sandy McMahon, whose troublesome knee broke down again, and Willie Maley. McMahon had to be taken off, while Maley soldiered on, but the Athletic News wrote, It was remarkable because it was won by a team practically reduced to 9 men. Not long after the start, McMahon got hurt, while in the second half, Maley, though he remained on the ground, might as well have been among the spectators, as he was useless. The spirit was there in abundance, but the flesh would not respond on any account. It was a terrible blow to the hopes of the Celtic when McMahon, who is their idol, got hurt. But the other members of the team, at this very stage, seemed to know what was demanded of them, and it is using mild language indeed when I say that they rose to the occasion, and in a manner too which has never been excelled in their long and honoured history. A flavour of the reaction to this Glasgow Cup triumph was caught in the Scottish referee of the 19th of November 1894, when an understandably anonymous correspondent penned a poem with the Latin title Celtic Triumphans, but described underneath as extract from a letter written by the boy from Donegal to a friend in the Ould country, in a terrible stage Irish patois. Tearing ages of Cushla, I send you great news. The Celts have lathered the famous light blues. The Rangers, I mean, who for 12 months or so were like paycocks with pride, now their pride is laid low. Alana, you mind how on Hampden the Blues in the Scottish Cup tie made us quake in our shoes, and gave us a 3-1 bating, and then how in Puchin we drowned our chagrin at their win. From that bating the Celts like a phoenix arose, and gave proof they could still deal some stiff sturdy blows. If not with their hand, then at least with their feet, for the Celtic are boys who can't stomach defeat. So with pride, Irish pride, I may tell you, Vic, that our own gallant boys showed the Rangers a trick, and on Saturday dealt the Spalpeen such a blow as will keep their teeth grinding for 12 months or so. 'Twas on Cathkin they mustered a gallant array of eager footballers, each keen for the fray, while full 20,000 spectators turned up to witness the fight for the famed Glasgow Cup. The toss of the coin gave first chance for our boys, then like demons they worked without shouting or noise, whilst the Rangers were just as determined and keen to gain further honours and glory, I ween. How the battle waged hot and the conflict waxed strong, you will find in the referee, not in my song. I can only relate as my tumbler I fill that our boys scored 2 goals while the Rangers scored 0. So I drink to the glory of Erin of Eld and success to the boys who her honour upheld. Be the venue in Dublin or Cork or in Clyde, for the Celtic is Ireland's own darlings and pride. I'm not sure whether to laugh or cry. Despite Sandy McMahon's ongoing injury troubles, hopes were high at this stage that the Scottish Cup would be won again when, the week after the Glasgow Cup win, Queen's Park were sent crashing out in the first round with a 4-1 win. The next round was at Easter Road against 2nd Division Hibernian, whose attitude towards Celtic had hardly softened since the near riot at Easter Road in 1888, especially after they had won the 2nd Division in 1893-94, but Celtic had been one of the clubs who voted against their election to the top league, with third-placed Clyde being the only one of the top 3 clubs accepted into the First Division. Hibernian won the match 2-0 on the 15th of December, but Celtic protested that they had fielded 2 ineligible players, and the SFA ordered a replay again at Easter Road on the 29th of December. This time Celtic won 2-0, although curiously the 2 ineligible players were allowed to play again in the second game. We can only imagine how Hibs might have celebrated when Celtic were knocked out of the competition in the following round, the quarter-finals, beaten 1-0 away to Dundee on the 19th of January. The Scottish Cup was won this season by St Bernard's, who disposed of Hearts in an Edinburgh derby in the semi-final and Renton in the final. The season finished on a high note for Celtic, with a 4-0 win over Rangers in the Glasgow Charity Cup final on the 25th of May, their 4th success in a row in the competition. Not only were Rangers put to the sword in a Towsy match, in which the Dundee Courier reported on the 27th of May, "The game inclined to be rough at times, the Rangers being the greater sinners in this respect. In the second portion of the game, the Rangers' backs paid more attention to the man than to the ball, otherwise the team would have fared better." The win provided Celtic with a much-needed boost at the end of a difficult season, and was especially satisfying for two players who had been written off earlier in the campaign. Sandy McMahon was back to his best, scoring a glorious hat-trick, and James Kelly, along with Dan Doyle, had been the mastermind of the victory, scoring the second goal himself from a free kick. The Scottish referee reporting on the 27th of May. Doyle for once denied himself the pleasure of taking a free kick. Kelly was entrusted with it and proved a success, the Celts obtaining their second goal therefrom. The old Rentonian was in spanking form and without doubt carried off the palm at half-back. The older he gets, the better he becomes. He coached young O'Rourke in his usual quiet manner. Despite finishing 5 points behind Rangers in the league, the Glasgow Cup and Glasgow Charity Cup wins meant that Celtic's season had been salvaged to a certain extent, with the failure for the third season in a row to regain the Scottish Cup felt more keenly than ending the season in second place in the league. The Scottish referee concluded their report on the Glasgow Charity Cup final on the 27th of May. The Celts are now holders of two cups, the Glasgow and the Glasgow Charity Cup, and are second in the league championship. They should be contented with their season's work. Saturday's crushing defeat will give the Rangers food for reflection during the close season. An interesting snippet in the Scottish referee that day read, Father Maley of Old Cumnock and a brother to Tom and Willie of the Celtic is interesting himself in the formation of a team in that district to be called Celtic. There was a sense of loss and disbelief amongst the supporters in the summer of 1895 when Johnny Campbell was allowed to leave the club after a season spent battling against a troublesome knee injury for which he had been treated under a specialist in Manchester. Campbell was reluctant to leave Celtic, but he was given little choice and chose Aston Villa over Sunderland on Thursday the 13th of June. The departure of Campbell made the newspapers all over Britain, and possibly the best report appeared in the Gloucester Citizen on Friday the 14th of June 1895 in a column entitled General Intelligence, appearing amongst several other snippets of news that occurred that fateful day. Senor Ruiz Zorrilla, the Spanish Republican leader, died on Thursday. A labourer was killed and two others injured by lightning near Sleaford on Thursday. The Aston Villa FC has signed on John Campbell of the Celtic Club, one of the best forwards in Scotland. At Bury on Thursday, Michael Halligan was sent to jail for cutting the tails of horses and cows. 3 horses and 12 cows had been docked at one farm. At Christie's on Thursday, some good prices were realised for a number of valuable old French snuff boxes. As much as £1,000 was given for a Louis XVI gold box with paintings by Boucher. Susan Wilson, who has a record of 152 convictions for drunkenness, was again before the Salford Police Court on Thursday on a charge of being drunk and creating a disturbance at the workhouse. She was sentenced to a month's hard labour. Johnny Campbell would return to Celtic in May of 1897. But not before being Aston Villa's top scorer as they won the Football League in 1895-96, and helping them to the League and FA Cup double the following season. He opened the scoring in Villa's 3-2 win over Everton in the final at Crystal Palace on the same day they won their second successive title, with nearest challengers Derby County losing to Bury. Allowing Campbell to leave was clearly a big mistake. As temperatures rose behind the scenes in 1895 over the issue of incorporation, Celtic regained the league title in some style in a strange campaign when only one league match in the season was played in the calendar year of 1896, the other 17 games crammed into the autumn and early winter of 1895. It looked set to be another difficult campaign when 3 of the first 7 matches were lost, all to the Edinburgh clubs. Hibernian finally admitted to the First Division after winning Division 2 for the second successive season in 1894-95, defeated Celtic 4-2 at Easter Road on the 24th of August. After losing friendlies away to Manchester City, Liverpool and Newcastle United on the 2nd, 3rd and 4th of September, not to mention what must have been an exhausting schedule travelling from Glasgow to Manchester to Liverpool to Newcastle on consecutive days, Celtic shrugged off those 4 consecutive defeats to beat Rangers 4-2 at Ibrox on the 7th of September, despite trailing 2-0 with only 20 minutes to go. The friendly defeat at Liverpool had repercussions for recent signing Tommy Morrison, an outside right from the Protestant stronghold of Sandy Row in Belfast, who is thought to be the first Irish-born player to play for Celtic. The Liverpool Mercury of the 4th of September wrote, "A little later on, when the visitors' outside right was getting the worst of an argument with McLean, the former player infringed beyond bounds, and having already been cautioned by the referee, was on this occasion ordered off the field, a punishment he richly deserved, but which he and his confreres at first strongly demurred to." The Celtic Wiki entry for the player says, Tommy Morrison was said to be difficult, and Celtic were asked to rein in Sandy Row's antics and to curb his tongue, although these traits can be beneficial on occasion too. We can gain a fair idea how strongly the referee of the Liverpool friendly, Mr Lewis, would agree with this appraisal from the letter he wrote to the SFA to complain about Morrison after the match, a complaint reproduced in the Scottish Referee of the 20th of September 1895. "I was refereeing a football match at Liverpool on Tuesday the 3rd inst, Liverpool v Celtic, Glasgow, and was very sorry to have to complain of the conduct of one of the Celtic players, named Morrison. He was continually pushing and hacking his opponents, and when I gave a decision, he nearly always questioned it and used most insulting language. I told him I should not allow him to use such language, and that if he persisted, I should report him to the association. 'Report away,' he says. 'You have nothing to do with us. We are not English players.' On another occasion, he said I was to go to the devil and learn the rules. Had he been one of our English players, I should certainly have sent him off after this, but being a visitor, I put up with it. On another occasion, he said, 'Do you think we're a lot of puppies and are kidding us?' This was almost continuous during the second portion of the game. When nearing the finish he had the ball, and on a Liverpool player taking it away from him, he took a most deliberate and violent kick at his opponent, but fortunately could not quite reach him, otherwise he would have hurt him very badly. I stopped the game and ordered him off the field. He was going, but very slowly, when the other Celtic players ran round and advised him not to go off, saying I had nothing to do with ordering one of their players off. I said, 'Very well, the game is over then, as I shall not allow you to play with him on.' Ultimately, he went off." The disciplinary committee summarily suspended Morrison for 2 months. Mr Lewis may have had a hard time with Morrison, but the same meeting also dealt with the Airdrie assault case. After a cup tie between Airdrieonians and Partick Thistle, D. McIntyre, the Clydebank referee, alleged that during the match he was assaulted by Thistle's P. Smith, who, after being incensed by a decision during the game, came up behind him as they were leaving the field at the end and struck him on the face, cutting his lip. Smith was called before the committee and questioned as to whether he had hit the referee. His defence was that he had meant to, but had missed, so he couldn't have assaulted him. He was banned for the rest of the season, with the chairman regretting that the committee had no power to ban him for life. The chairman remarked that to strike a referee was a most dastardly and cowardly thing to do. The win at Ibrox was a real morale booster for Celtic, but it counted for nothing a week later at Celtic Park when they were beaten 5-0 by champions Hearts, Celtic's heaviest ever home defeat. 2 days later, a hat-trick of defeats to Edinburgh teams was completed with a 3-0 defeat away to St Bernard's. Celtic made an official protest to the SFA over the refereeing of the St Bernard's match. Referees in those days came from the clubs themselves, while a representative from each club ran the line in either half. The referee on this occasion was Mr Campbell of Heart of Midlothian. The Glasgow Herald match report on the 17th of September 1895 gives the impression of an evenly contested game despite the scoreline, and with the score at 1-0, the Herald correspondent wrote, "For an infringement, the Celtic claimed a penalty kick, which caused much dispute among the players, but Mr Campbell was obdurate." The report concluded, It is understood that the Celtic are going to bring before the league a decision of the referee. One of St Bernard's team fouled the ball inside the penalty line, and as the St Bernards had only scored a single goal at the time, the Celtic state that the refusal of the referee to award them a penalty kick affected the game. They protested both on the field and after the match. There was serious discontent amongst the supporters at this stage of the campaign, with a series of eerily familiar letters appearing in the pages of the Scottish Referee on the 20th of September 1895, bemoaning the chopping and changing of the team, the amount of friendlies being added to the fixture list, and the general poor form being shown. An ardent Celt wrote, "Sir, as a Celtic supporter, I am thoroughly disgusted with them, and now, after Saturday's and Monday's defeats, I should think them a trifle impertinent should they expect the League Championship for 1895-96 with the patched-up 11s doing duty for them at present. They must be positively sickening the few players they keep regularly in the team. I venture to state that if the following team were together playing only League and Cup tie matches for 2 seasons, they would lick all Scotland and the best teams in England every time of asking. Goal, MacArthur. Backs, Battles and Doyle. Halfbacks, O'Rourke, Kelly and McElhenney. Forwards, Morrison, Blessington, Martin, McMahon and Divers." Another letter, signed "A Supporter," opined, "Sir, I think the time has now come when the Celtic Committee should be trying to do something towards putting a team on the field that is fit to compete with our other league teams. Such a miserable display as has been the last 2 matches I have not seen for a long time from a team representing the Celts, more especially when they have so many first-class players at hand and are paying so much in wages. To lose every match in England and come home and lose another 2 league matches, this is not Celtic form, and the sooner the Celtic Committee try to remedy matters and choose a team to carry them through their league matches and cup ties and not be continually changing their men every day, the better for the club." From this unpromising situation, Celtic never looked back, winning every league match after the St Bernard's loss and avenging the defeats to the 3 Edinburgh clubs with a 4-1 win at Tynecastle and 3-1 and 2-1 wins over Hibernian and St Bernard's at Celtic Park. Through October and November, a blistering run of form saw Celtic go into overdrive, scoring an incredible 50 goals in 9 competitive matches, including the club's record competitive win by 11-0 over Dundee on the 26th of October 1895. The Glasgow Herald was almost disgusted with the match, with no inkling in its tone that anything notable had occurred. The league match between the Celtic and Dundee at Celtic Park was expected to be one of the closest of the season on Saturday, but it turned out a miserable fiasco. Dundee were unfortunate with their men, 3 of them, Ferrier, Longare and MacDonald, being injured, and they played the whole of the second half with 9 men only. However, the Celtic had 5 goals when Dundee's full team were on the field, and even up to that time, the losers were certainly outplayed. In the second half they went, metaphorically speaking, to pieces, and the Celtic scoring goal after goal won by 11-0. The crushing defeat is all the more remarkable, coming after, as it did, Dundee's recent brilliant victories. The Herald correspondent went on to write, "The results of Saturday's matches leaves the League Championship as open as ever. Never since its inauguration has the competition been so keen, and never has it caused so much interest. The fact of the Rangers drawing with the Hibernians on Saturday places the Hearts, the Celtic and the Hibernians precisely on a level, each with 16 points for 11 matches played. The Rangers themselves are relatively in a better position than any of the leaders, as they have 11 points for 8 matches played, but they have some stiff matches yet to negotiate, notably Dundee, Celtic and Clyde away." In the weeks following the record victory over Dundee, Celtic continued to pile on the goals, with a 5-1 win in the Glasgow Cup semi-final over Partick Thistle and a 7-0 win over Third Lanark in the league, before playing a remarkable Glasgow Cup final against Queen's Park on the 16th of November 1895. The match was played at Ibrox, and before the start, there was the now traditional crowd break-in at Celtic Queen's Park matches as 25,000 thronged into the ground. Perhaps having learned the lesson of the 1892 Scottish Cup final, mounted police quickly cleared the pitch. One spectator was crushed and taken to the pavilion, where, the Scottish referee reported, he was quickly revived by the Celtic trainer. A week of downpours had left the pitch sodden and heavy, with the Rangers ground staff covering it in a thick layer of sawdust, as recorded in the Scottish referee of the 18th of November. The ground was a perfect quagmire, or, as the enthusiastic reporter has it, a sea of mud mixed with sawdust. Rangers executive, with a careful regard for the players, had bags of this dry-as-dust stuff strewed over the ground, and not a few of the players were glad to find such a clean resting place. Martin gambolled amongst it like a kitten, and even tried to score a goal with his head almost touching the sawdust, a feat worthy of one of Hengler's clowns. The energy-sapping conditions would prove to have a great bearing on the outcome, with Queen's Park tiring badly in the final half hour of the match, while Celtic seemed to grow stronger. The Scottish referee paints a picture of woe for Queen's Park, undone by the heavy conditions and particularly by poor refereeing. The Edinburgh Evening News, on the other hand, waxed lyrically about Celtic, and while acknowledging Queen's Park's grievances about the referee, insisted that he did little wrong. The match got off to a flyer for Celtic, who took the lead in just 5 minutes through Sandy McMahon, and almost scored a second minutes later. But Queen's Park gradually asserted control and scored 3 goals in the last 20 minutes of the half to go in 3-1 up at half-time, leaving Celtic looking down and out. Even after play resumed, Queen's Park remained in control, but on the hour mark, Celtic pulled one back through a goalkeeping blunder, as the Scottish referee reported. Anderson at length came to their aid, and so too did Ferguson and McMahon, their ablest pair. Anderson, in answer to a centre from them, for once bungled the save. The ball struck the bar and bounded under. Now the turn to shout had come, and what a shout! Tear into it now, boys! And tear into it they did to some tune. Sandy McMahon drew the game level a few minutes later, with the Scottish referee recording Queen's protests about a foul in the build-up, and then came the 4th goal, which the Scottish referee insisted was offside and knocked the heart from the Queen's Park players. Queens fell away like snow off a dyke, whilst the Celts rose as if but beginning the strife. Not content with a draw, they redoubled their energies to win. Feet long feeble, hearts well nigh sick unto death, were strengthened and lightened. At every step or plough through the mud, Celts received courage and boldness. On the 4th goal being scored by Ferguson, there was no stopping of the Celts. They scampered through the defence of the Queens like deer through an open gate. Disgusted at referee Bailey's decisions, the Queens lay down to die, and die ingloriously they did. How offside was not given is one of the puzzles of this queer final, for offside plain it was. This goal sealed the Queen's fate. Kick they could, but kick they wouldn't. It was all up. Cui bono? Goals 5, nay 6 were rattled on, and a team emerged conquerors from a tie, who a short half hour before looked all over a beaten company. Their 4th goal did it all. Had it been legitimate, all would have been well, but it was not. And there you are, Queens were beaten unfairly. The Edinburgh Evening News was far more complimentary about Celtic and made little mention of any controversy in their main match report, writing on the 18th of November, "The big match on Saturday was of a nature to rejoice the heart of the football reporter. There was incident enough in the game to furnish the columns of description and comment, and what more can the pressman pray for, save that, if he has an open mind, the best team should win? These conditions were fulfilled on Saturday, and happiness should have reigned on the crowded press benches. And as with the reporters, so too with the impartial spectators. They had the opportunity of witnessing a match fairly and squarely fought between two of the finest teams we ever saw wearing Scottish club colours. They saw a game remarkable in the quality of the play, and they saw the better team win in a manner which must have consoled those whose sympathy was with the presumed weaker side. Between the teams there is little in point of ability. Indeed, in a 60 minutes match, the Queen's Park would probably come off as winners. But we should think the Celtic 11 of Saturday would beat their QP rivals at least 4 times out of 6 under the conditions which prevailed on Saturday. In 60 minutes, the amateurs, playing on a ground which would take a great deal out of any team, had shot their bolt, while their opponents were going as strongly as ever. The paper then went on to discuss Hearts' prospects in their upcoming match with Celtic. If the Heart of Midlothian beat the Celtic on Saturday next, it will be one of the feats of their existence. Looking to the game the Celtic played on Saturday, we cannot believe that they will be beaten in the race for the championship unless they bring it upon themselves. There is all the difference between the Celts of September and of November that there is between a cart horse and a thoroughbred. Anyone with a personal knowledge of the Celtic in their big matches from their institution till now must agree with us that no Celtic 11 ever played better than Saturday's. The Edinburgh Evening News then turned to the issue of the refereeing, acknowledging that there had been a great hostility towards the referee from the Queen's Park supporters, but expressing support for the man in the middle. The refereeing and the attendance demand a few words in passing. Mr. James Bailey was paid the compliment of being asked to come through to officiate. This he did not do to the general satisfaction. 'Twas not in mortal to do so. There was a well-dressed individual on the stand a couple of rows behind the press seats, whose enthusiasm for the Queen's Park bordered on frenzy. The language he used towards the referee on many occasions would have put one of the troopers who swore in Flanders to shame, and he seemed to have a good many fellows in the crowd, the attitude of a section of which towards the referee was not excused even by the excitement prevailing. The Celtic section took adverse decisions with less to do, possibly because they were outnumbered in the proportion of 3-2, the Queen's Park being as much the popular team as the Celts were favourites. Mr. Bailey seemed to be in two minds over a small point in the early part of the game, but with that exception, it would be unfair to criticise any of his decisions. Celtic thus retained the Glasgow Cup, but Queen's Park would have their revenge in the new year when they once again knocked Celtic out of the Scottish Cup in the first round with a 4-2 win at Celtic Park on the 18th of January. Once again, Celtic missed out on the blue-ribboned competition of Scottish football, and their failure to recapture the trophy was a continuing sore point, despite the multiple League and Glasgow Cup wins since their only previous triumph in 1892. By that time, the league title had already been secured, and two stirring victories in particular clinched it. At Tynecastle the week after the Glasgow Cup win, Celtic took on the champions, who had beaten them 5-0 at Celtic Park earlier in the season. The crowd was estimated at between 15 to 20,000, and the Scottish referee wrote on the 25th of November, "To the eye, every nook and corner of the Hearts enclosure was filled, and a little after the kick-off, it looked as if the doors would have to be closed, so densely packed was the crowd between the rails and the walls. In the near future, the Tynecastle people will have to acquire more accommodation if they wish to march with the times of increasing crowds. The precincts of the ground were in a lively state for hours, and every conceivable conveyance, from a fish cart to a four-in-hand, carried footballers to the scene of operations. All along the route too, the windows were occupied by people, many of whom, I dare say, were struck with amazement at the turmoil, and wondered in themselves what all the excitement was about. The Celts had a large following with them, who gave evidence early in the game of their presence. The scene at the start was indeed an impressive one, and those of a philosophic turn might reasonably be expected to cogitate on the wonderful spell which bound such a throng of human beings." The assembled throng were treated to a brilliant exhibition of football by Celtic, who led by 2 goals at half-time, both scored by Alan Martin, a centre-forward signed from Hibernian in June 1895. Martin played only one season for Celtic, scoring 18 goals in 18 competitive games before returning to Hibernian. The week before, the Edinburgh Evening News had all but dismissed his contribution to the Glasgow Cup final, writing, "Martin may score a gross of goals for the Celtic against weaker teams, but in such a game as the final, he is not a dangerous factor. While the Queens were playing like novices, Martin was ever conspicuous. When the pinch came, the Celtic played exclusively a wing game, and the centre had no hand in their victory." 7 days later, though, they were forced into a begrudging rethink. "The open game suited Martin, who was in his best mood, Both his goals were well got, his second being reminiscent of the grand goals James McLaren used to score for the old Hibernians. As the second half began, Hearts resorted to some rough tactics, of which even their own fans made their disapproval known. The Scottish referee wrote of one Hearts player on the 25th of November. "Russell's play was the puzzle of the match, especially in the second period. He behaved like someone whose upper story was unhinged, kicking the air and opponents in a most ludicrous manner." Despite the overly physical nature of the Hearts' play as they lost their discipline, Celtic went further ahead when Sandy McMahon fired an unstoppable shot from the edge of the box, and then from a Dan Doyle free kick, Mirk headed into his own goal to put Celtic 4-0 up, at which large numbers of the spectators headed for the exits, causing congestion at one end of the ground, with palisading giving way and hundreds spilling onto the track. Police managed to restore order without play being stopped, and Hearts netted a consolation goal in the last seconds. For the second successive week, the Edinburgh Evening News was effusive in its praise of Celtic, in stark contrast to the Scottish referee, which was anxious to play up Hearts' bad luck throughout the game. "The nature of the game was no surprise to those conversant with the form of the Celtic. They are the best balanced combination in Scotland at the present time, and what is more, the most likely to retain pre-eminence once gained. Theirs is no team of budding talent either. Almost every man is a player of extensive experience, some are of old renown. The rejuvenescence of the Celtic veterans has been one of the features of the season. Who, a year ago, could have dreamed of Kelly, Maley, McMahon and Madden not merely holding their own with the best, but ousting younger players from positions in a team which 12 months ago seemed a spent force because of its contingent of veterans? There is a danger of some of the men stalling, and possibly the Celtic form is too good to last. However, in more ways than one, the 11 is a remarkable one, and one of the best which ever sported a Scottish club's colours." It went on to say of the half-back line, "Maley, Kelly and Battles are a grand half-back trio. There is height, weight, speed and skill in the line, and if Kelly is not so nimble as he was, his judgment is still exceptional." Even this description of Kelly could not outdo the Scottish referee, reporting on the Glasgow Cup final the week before. "Kelly has the spirit of perpetual youth, and he was the fastest man on the field." In this, his penultimate season as a player, James Kelly was still holding his own on the field. Wins over St Mirren and St Bernard's in their next two matches set up yet another hugely important match against Rangers on the 14th of December 1895. On the morning of the match, Celtic were top on 25 points from 15 matches, 6 points ahead of Rangers, Hearts and Hibernian, who were all tied on 18 points, although Rangers had played only 12 matches. A win would not clinch the title, but it would make it all but certain. As was almost customary by now, the Scottish referee bemoaned the ill luck that afflicted Rangers, who had two players struck down by injury during the match, one going off for a spell before returning. On a typically wet and windy December afternoon in Glasgow, Rangers won the toss, but mystifyingly elected to play against the wind in the first half, the paper reporting, "Cruel was their fate. Likewise, when they did not take advantage on the toss of the wind which was blowing towards the north goal, thinking, no doubt, that on the right-about wheel the wind would be with them to spur their flagging zeal. Alas, for their hopes of the flag, Boreas changed his mind, with the result that the element he controls veered round a full turn of the compass and blew in the last half directly in the teeth of the Rangers." The game got off to a lacklustre start, with both teams feeling their way into the game before Rangers took the lead in the 10th minute, upon which they seemed to take fright, the Edinburgh Evening News reporting on the 18th of December. "On form, the Rangers are as clever a team as the Celtic, and when they play such a game as might suggest to the outsider that they were lying down to the Irishmen, there is only one explanation, and that is that the Rangers are beaten by the Celtic name before the Celtic players enter upon their task. No one would for a moment dream of hinting that the Rangers were non-triers, but their case is not much less discreditable such an exhibition as they gave. For 10 minutes they had the better of the moderate game, and then they became frightened at their boldness in scoring and quietly fizzled out." Jimmy Blessington took advantage of a blunder by the Rangers keeper, McLeod, to grab an equaliser, and Alan Martin put Celtic ahead shortly before the interval. The Dundee Courier of the 16th of December reporting that he headed through a beauty for them. Sandy McMahon then had an astonishing miss minutes later, shooting high over the bar from close range. Willie Ferguson added a third goal in 50 minutes, and Celtic then scored 3 times in a 10-minute spell midway through the half through Blessington, Barney Battles and Tommy Morrison. Strange as it may seem, many in the 25,000 crowd, a new record for a Scottish League match, were by now streaming for the exits, possibly to escape the elements with the game over as a contest, before Rangers added a late consolation goal to complete the scoring in a 6-2 rout for Celtic. Tommy Morrison, restored to the forward line after his ban, added to his reputation with a challenge on Rangers' Mitchell, which incapacitated him for the rest of the match. The Edinburgh Evening News reported, "Ferguson is so inveterate a poacher that one instinctively dislikes him. And Morrison seems to be so nasty an opponent that the feeling toward him will soon be considerably stronger than dislike." The win left Celtic within touching distance of the league championship, and the following week a 3-0 win over Dumbarton put them on 28 points and requiring only a draw against third Lanark in their final match to clinch it. They say the past is a foreign country, they do things differently there, and this is illustrated by the attendance at the Dumbarton match. After setting a new Scottish League record attendance against Rangers, the Glasgow Evening Post of the 23rd of December 1895 reported, "Saturday was not an ideal football day, the ground having been frostbound previous to and during the match. The fog killed the gate and latterly spoiled the play, which was never at any time of a very high-class order. There would not be more than 1,000 spectators present, and there was very little enthusiasm, the Celts having had the game in hand almost from the start. Martin put on the first goal in the first few minutes of the game." This sparsely attended and eminently unremarkable game proved to be the title-winning match. After a lull in league football, Rangers could only draw with Clyde at Barrowfield on the 8th of February 1896, leaving them unable to match Celtic's points total. The 2-1 win over third Lanark in a now meaningless match on the 29th of February was a satisfying end to the league campaign. Earlier in the season, a series of friendlies had been lost to English clubs, but honour was restored with 5 victories in April over Sunderland 3-2, Aston Villa 3-2, Everton 2-1, Derby County 1-0 and Burnley 2-1. The match against Aston Villa was not quite a friendly. The previous year, the winners of the Scottish and English leagues, Hearts and Sunderland, had played off for the unofficial World Championship at Tynecastle. The Sunderland team, made up of 11 Scots, won the match 5-3. 2 of their goals were scored by John Campbell, a former Renton teammate of James Kelly, who had also played in the Renton West Bromwich Albion World Championship match in 1888. This time the meeting between Celtic and English champions Aston Villa was billed as the International League Championship. The Scottish referee wrote on the 20th of April 1896, "We are promised a capital exposition of football this evening at Celtic Park when Aston Villa and Celtic do battle for the International League Championship. Last year it may be remembered that a similar contest took place at Tynecastle between the Hearts and Sunderland, the latter club winning by 5-3. Aston Villa opened their Scottish tour on Saturday at Edinburgh, and although they beat the Hibs by a majority of 3 goals, the result does not ensure such a runaway victory on points as this at Celtic Park. There is no question but that the present Villa team are a clever set of players and will prove hard to lick. The Celts, however, must not count too much on the Hibernians' result, as the luck went with the Birmingham men. A victory tonight is badly wanted by the Celts. Their recent performances have proven very disappointing to their followers, and if they pull off tonight, they will be forgiven much. It is almost needless to say that this game of the 3 on the touring programme of the villains is the one which they desire most of all to win." Celtic were assisted for the occasion by the versatile Queen's Park player John Gillespie, who had recently captained Scotland in what proved to be his only cap in a 4-0 win against Wales in March 1896. Gillespie filled in at right half. Aston Villa opened the scoring after just 5 minutes through, inevitably, former Celtic favourite Johnny Campbell. The Scottish referee wrote on the 24th of April, "Some applause was accorded this success on the part of the Villa, principally owing to the fact that Campbell, an old favourite at Parkhead, was the means." Villa had the better of the first half, but just before half-time, Celtic equalised after a flowing move involving Johnny Madden and Willie Ferguson that was finished off in fine style by Sandy McMahon. The goal lifted Celtic for the second half, and they took the lead when a Peter Meakin free kick, described as a scorcher in the Glasgow Herald on the 21st of April, came back off the goalkeeper, and Willie Ferguson was on hand to handily put on the second goal in pretty fashion. The play then intensified, swinging from end to end, and Villa scored a late equaliser from a corner kick. Darkness was now beginning to set in as the game drew to a close, and with a last desperate push, McMahon scored his second just before the final whistle to secure a 3-2 win for Celtic and the International League Championship. Looking back on season 1895-96, Celtic had hit a rich seam of form in October-November that elevated their play above anything previously seen in Scotland. They had now won the league 3 times in its first 6 seasons and retained the Glasgow Cup, but there was more than a tinge of disappointment in going out of the Scottish Cup in the first round yet again to Queen's Park. The win over Aston Villa was especially impressive. They were English champions and would retain the title while winning the double the following season. In the circumstances, Celtic's fall from grace in 1896-97 was as spectacular as it was unexpected. 2 matches best illustrate the on-field problems that saw Celtic implode and finish in 4th place in the league, their lowest ever finishing position at the time. The match against Hibernian at Celtic Park on the 28th of November 1896 was spoken of in some newspapers as the league decider, Hibernian being 4 points ahead of Celtic at the top, but having played 2 matches more. The roots of the problem Celtic were about to face lay in the previous week's match, the Glasgow Cup final replay, lost 2-1 to Rangers on the 21st of November. Reporting on the final was generally critical of Celtic for their shady play, and 3 players who had been singled out for individual criticism in various newspapers informed the committee shortly before kick-off against Hibs that they wanted the press box cleared or they would not play. As a flavour of the criticism, the London-based Pall Mall Gazette reported on the 23rd of November 1896. The Rangers are in some respects much more popular than the Celts, who are notorious for their rough play, but it was a matter of surprise last week that the former were able to hold their own against the latter. The victory was deserved as well as popular, for the Rangers played a much more finished game than their opponents, whose performance was as usual marred by objectionable tactics. The Rangers-leaning Scottish referee wrote of Barney Battles on the 23rd of November, "But in mentioning this, we have also to remember that Battles did not enhance his position as a left-back. A little less pugilism and a little more football would be much more effective to his side, while it would also conduce to more friendly relations with his opponents and be better appreciated by the spectators." Elsewhere in that day's edition, the Scottish referee wrote of Peter Meakin, "A first-class defence and feeder, but with a strong inclination to a prodigal use of his weight." The column then concluded, "We were about to criticise Battles when the point of the pencil broke." The Edinburgh Evening News on the 30th of November 1896 provided a detailed report of what happened. "It appears that there was nothing unusual in the demeanour of the revolters 15 minutes from the hour of kick-off. Battles, Meakin and Divers arrayed themselves as usual in football outfit, seemingly prepared to take the field with their comrades. At 2:15 p.m, Mr. Maley entered the pavilion and requested the players to hurry out in order that a photograph might be taken of the team. Then the storm burst. Battles and Meakin boldly requested the officials to order the expulsion of the reporters from the press box, otherwise they would do so themselves. At first, this extraordinary suggestion was treated as a pure joke, but matters soon assumed a serious and acute stage. Divers joined the other two. Regardless of all consequences, either to themselves or to the club, the rebellious players deliberately announced their intention of taking no part in the game unless the officials acquiesced in their wishes to expel the press representatives. Orders were given for the club room to be cleared of all parties other than players and officials. Explanations were then asked regarding the reason for such an extraordinary and ill-timed request. Battles and Meekin, in resentful tones, explained that they were determined not to submit to what they characterised as hostile and unwarrantable criticism in the public press in connection with the Glasgow final tie, and had recourse to this procedure to compel the officials to share their displeasure. Messrs Glass, Shaughnessy, McLaughlin and Maley expostulated with the malcontents, pointing out the ridiculous nature of the demand and its consequences. Arguments and reason were in vain. Kelly, Doyle and other players tried to persuade their now excited brethren to take a rational view of the situation, to show their loyalty to the club by turning out, and to take proper and legitimate action to redress whatever grievances existed. But Meekin, Battles and Divers proceeded to resume their ordinary garb when they saw the officials were not to be coerced, and subsequently left the pavilion. An attempt was made by Mr M. Dunbar, who came upon the scene as the men were leaving the ground, to induce them to return. There is absolutely no doubt that the players fully believed the officials would cave in, for they returned to the stripping room with their determination of playing, provided they got an assurance of some sort that their desires would be gratified. Battles and Divers actually proceeded to divest themselves of their clothing. The second demand, however, was as futile as its predecessor, and so far as even gratifying them to the extent of approaching the press, the officials absolutely defied the trio to take any personal action in the direction of molesting any individual in the press box. With kick-off delayed 15 minutes while a solution was sought to the player strike, the all but retired Willie Maley got himself stripped for action along with 12th man Barney Crossan. But this still left Celtic a player short, and a message was sent to Hampden recalling Tom Dunbar, who was playing for the reserves, and he finally arrived at the ground about 15 minutes into the second half to bring them up to the full complement of players. In the circumstances, it was something of a triumph for the makeshift side to draw the game 1-1, having played with 10 men against a strong wind in the first half. They actually took the lead in the second half, with Maley creating the chance for Blessington to finish, but Hibs ruined the moment with a last-minute equaliser. In the aftermath, the committee announced that the malcontents would be suspended indefinitely and would never kick a ball for the club again. Barney Battles was loaned to Liverpool a few weeks later and then sold to Dundee at the end of the season. He returned in 1898. John Divers was transferred to Everton in January 1897 but returned in October 1898. Peter Meekin was sold to Everton along with Divers, but he never returned. Without the 19th century Three Amigos, Celtic fell out of contention for the league despite winning their next two league matches away to Third Lanark and home to Clyde, but then lost their final three matches against Rangers, Dundee and St Mirren, finishing 4 points behind champions Hearts, who took the title after Hibs Hibsed it, the Edinburgh clubs finishing first and second with Rangers in third. Before the end of the league campaign, Celtic experienced probably the lowest point of their existence so far as the ongoing quest for a second Scottish Cup win hit the buffers yet again in the first round, and this time in the most humiliating circumstances. A Celtic team decimated by the suspensions, injuries and another strike, this time by Dan Doyle in pursuit of better wages, left Celtic fielding an extremely makeshift side against Arthurlie at Barrhead on the 9th of January 1897. A club in turmoil was stunned by the 4-2 loss on a tight, bumpy pitch that set the seal on a disastrous season. The Edinburgh Evening News report on the 11th of January caught the general mood. The story of Celtic's downfall in 1897 is almost incomparable in the records of our national competition. At the beginning of the season, the club possessed 5 backs of outstanding ability in Meekin, Doyle, Orr, Battles and Dunbar, a reserve power in fact which augured well for the maintenance of its position in event of misfortune crippling its resources by accident to either Meekin or Doyle. By a bitter irony of fate, the first cup tie found the Celts in such an awkward predicament that not one of the quintet was able to take the field against Arthurlie. But the series of misfortunes did not end here. MacArthur was so seriously injured in the match with Rangers that he was unable to keep goal. McElhaney broke down on the first day of the year in the Hibernian match after a long spell of idleness caused by injury. Russell was laid aside with inflammation of the eyes on Friday. Gilhooly was too late in putting in an appearance to take the field, and with McMahon recruiting in Manchester, leaving aside the suspends, the blacklist was complete. The team was patched up by the introduction of a half-back and forward combination at back, represented in the persons of Crossan and John King. Had Doyle turned up, as he should, the disaster would have been averted, for it may safely be said that King's utter helplessness lost the tie, despite the poor appearance of Cullen at goal and the miserable play of the team as a whole. After commenting on the absence of Orr due to a twisted knee and the abstention from training of other players, the writer says, "Sympathy in the bitter hour of misfortune only extends to such men as Kelly, Crossan, A. King and Blessington and the club officials. What a trial a veteran like Kelly had to experience in battling so well against such odds. What a humiliation for the captain of an international team. What a humbling of the mighty name, Celtic." Celtic was clearly not in a happy place in the spring of 1897, and the on-field divisions and tensions only mirrored those amongst the committee and the membership, which had slowly come to a head over the previous 5 years, but were now reaching boiling point. At the half-yearly meeting in December 1895, it was reported that Celtic's income for the year was £4,475, while expenditure was £4,731. Joseph Shaughnessy, one of the principal voices behind calls for incorporation, stated that only £4 of the club's debts had been cleared, which now stood at £1,442. The Edinburgh Evening News of the 13th of December reported that when a motion was put forward to form a limited liability company, the limited liability proposal was strenuously opposed. Mr. T.E. Maley pointed out that, according to the Constitution, the matter could not be entertained. The chairman stated that the matter was only before the membership for consideration and that no decision could be come to. During the discussion, it was held that the club was originally formed for charitable purposes and that this scheme would entirely frustrate this. On the other hand, the argument in favour of the scheme was the risk the committee had to bear in the debt of the club. However, a motion by Mr. T.E. Maley was put before the meeting as follows: that a committee be appointed to consider the question of limited liability, draw up a scheme and also consider a method of wiping off the debt. A direct negative was moved by Mr. Hughes, and on going to the vote, the latter was carried by 53 to 31. The report carries little hint of the acrimony caused at the meeting between the ordinary working class members on one side and the rising publicans and businessmen on the other. Tom Campbell and Pat Woods write in Dreams and Songs to Sing, A New History of Celtic, that a dispute arose between one Frank Haviland, a gasworks labourer, and the Vice President John McLaughlin, which resulted in McLaughlin raising a slander action at Glasgow Sheriff Court for what he claimed was a false and calumnious statement. He claimed damages of £100, which would have amounted to about 2 years' wages for a man like Haviland. The sheriff dismissed the claim, stated that it should never have been raised, and awarded Haviland the costs. The debt, which was being cited as the major reason for the necessity of incorporation, had arisen from the building of the new Celtic Park, quickly christened Paradise, in 1892. Work had continued in extending and improving the ground since then, and it was a further improvement that finally led to incorporation in 1897. By late 1896, with Celtic enjoying great success on the pitch and the fans flooding into the ground in record numbers, the debt had been greatly reduced to just £400. But there was great disquiet that it had now been 3 years since any contributions had been made to the Poor Children's Dinner Table or indeed any other charitable donations made. With the Treasurer reporting in December 1896 that the debt would soon be paid off, it might seem that the case for incorporation had been fatally undermined, but it arose again early in 1897. The Scottish Cyclists Union offered Celtic £500 to host that year's World Cycling Championships, but under the condition that improvements were made to the cycling track to bring it fully up to international standards. The work required was estimated at around £500, meaning the debt would rise again to about £900. The opponents of incorporation were finally worn down and the committee formed to draw up a plan including Tom Maley, Frank Haviland and M. Hughes, three of its most vocal opponents. The funds generated by incorporation, in which every member was given a single founder's share, generated so much income that by December 1897 the land on which Celtic Park stood was purchased from Lord Hosier's estate for £10,000, making Celtic the first football club in Scotland to own its ground outright. Willie Maley was appointed as secretary-manager of the new company, and James Kelly, finally retired from playing, was a member of the first board of directors. Possibly James Kelly's last appearance for Celtic came in the short-lived Glasgow League in a match against Queen's Park on the 17th of April 1897. The 2-0 defeat brought to an end one of the most significant playing careers in Celtic's history. From small beginnings in 3 Catholic parishes in the East End 10 years before, the club had become a giant of the British game, enjoying successes on the field and revenues off it that most other clubs in Britain could only dream about. It's hard to see this being possible without the presence of James Kelly, the player who more than any other gave the club at its birth the credibility it needed to survive. Kelly and Celtic had been good for each other. He joined the club as an apprentice joiner and was now a prosperous publican, Justice of the Peace and School Board member, as well as being a director of the new company. His playing career may have ended, but Kelly would remain one of the major power brokers at the club for many years to come. When Celtic took the field against Queen's Park in another Glasgow League match on the 3rd of May 1897, a new name appeared on the team sheet whose Celtic career forms a bridge between the eras of the early Celtic team and the club's first truly golden age of the early 20th century. Willie Orr would go on to serve Celtic with distinction for 10 years and has the unique honour of being the only Celt to win the league championship in both green and white stripes and hoops. Next time, we'll begin the Celtic story of the great Willie Orr.